Okay, what's good, everyone? It's Nigel here, Trinidad Empowerment Network. Let's go. Let's dissect this 110. Let's dive into this 110. You're going to like this one today, 10, because I'm amped up and I'm hype. Well, I ain't going to shout. I promise you. I try my best not to anyway. Because over the last few days in Trinidad and Tobago, it appears we've entered a conversation that goes beyond politics, that goes beyond personalities or disagreement. You know how we love to argue in Trinidad and disagree. It's now a conversation about the future of free speech, the future of our democratic rights, and the relationship between citizens and the state. Between citizens and the state. So let's unpack all of this. And before I do so, like and subscribe, please. It began with a statement from the Minister of Homeland Security, who announced his intention to request that the United States government revoke the visas of Trinidadians, including those with dual nationality. Laughably, those who criticize the government of Trinidad and Tobago online. Now, shortly after headlines appeared suggesting that dual citizens may lose their visas. Let me clear this nonsensical nonsense illiteracy up, 10. A dual citizen does not require a visa to enter the country they are a citizen of. That is the entire purpose of citizenship. So before we even reach the constitutional debate, we are already stuck in the mud. We've already seen proposals that don't even align with legal reality. But that should come as no surprise to you, 10, based on the human being delivering the message. Puppet on a string being told what to do by the people above him. So instead of clarifying or stepping back, the minister doubled down 24 hours ago. He publicly stated that Trinidad and Tobago may adopt China's social media control model. China's social media control model. That's what he's looking at now. He's doubled down. China's model is not content regulation, by the way. It's content control. It goes against everything we stand for in Trinidad and Tobago. If you stay tuned, I'll explain exactly why. It is a system where posts disappear instantly, critics can lose access to platforms, influencers require government approval to speak, and digital behavior is monitored and enforceable by law. That is not who we are in Trinidad. You know this, 10. This is not moderation. It's state-managed speech, 10. Once introduced, even partially, it becomes incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. This is not who we are, 10. And now this conversation isn't only happening amongst the citizen in Trinidad. Senior figures are now intervening, and rightly so. It's about time they grew a backbone. So former Prime Minister, National Security Minister Stuart Young, a senior counsel, called the direction a live and developing threat to democracy. And he is right. He questioned why a preventative detention order was used to detain a social media commentator instead of normal criminal law, which is there, by the way, to protect rights of citizens such as bail and due process. This is why we live in a democracy. This is why we have laws. The opposition leader followed suit. She followed suit, describing the move as unacceptable, undemocratic, and hostile to the very principles of free expression. And again, she's right. She went on to remind us that the country at least, that free and independent voices, including online platforms, are essential to transparency and accountability. I'm glad to hear the opposition speaking up on this. It's about time. Now, the former commissioner, not a man who I tend to agree with most of the time, the former commissioner, Gary Griffith, he said, in more than 30 years of service, I have never seen a government ask another country to punish its own citizens over speech. I don't think it's ever happened in the history of countries. He called it a dangerous attempt to silence dissent. Now, this is no longer commentary, 10. This is a constitutional concern being raised here by the powers that be. So the question now is, Could a citizen legally lose a visa over criticism? Let's look at the legality here. The answer is categorically no. Now, under US law, visas can only be revoked for national security concerns, for criminal activity, for immigration violations, obviously, for terrorism links, and for fraud. Not because the Homeland Security Minister of Trinidad and Tobago said so, even if Donald Trump's in charge. Political criticism is not a visa category. And if a visa was ever revoked unfairly, the person obviously has rights. You have rights as an individual. You have a right to appeal, request legal justification, obtain legal representation, challenge a decision. No foreign government can bypass those protections, even if Donald Trump's in charge. Even the international human rights law also protects political speech, including criticism of government. And importantly, 10, a government cannot deny entry to its own citizen. That's obvious, but it's probably not as obvious to the Homeland Security Minister. So legally, this proposal carries zero strength. It's weak. It's extremely feeble. And here's a part we must not ignore. Here is a part we must not ignore, 10. The danger is not the threat. The danger is that the threat was made. They're trying to silence us. In a democracy, governments do not silence citizens, 10. They respond to them. They respond to criticism. Criticism is not destabilization. It is indeed participation. You are participating in a democracy. And before we close, there's one final layer to this conversation. Stay locked in, because our history made or makes this moment impossible to ignore. In the Caribbean, 10, free speech was not handed to us. It was not handed to us. It was fought for. During slavery, speech was controlled because speech leads to thought, and thought leads to resistance. Our ancestors risked punishment, exile, and most of all, death for the right to speak, to question, to call injustice by its name. When emancipation came, one of the first freedoms reclaimed was the freedom to speak. And we built cultural identity around expression. Reggae protested oppression. Calypso exposed corruption. Carnival mocked power. And steel pan became the sound of pride and defiance. This tradition exists because silence was once enforced, and breaking silence became resistance. 10. So when anyone, especially a government, attempts to decide who may speak and who may not, and which voices deserves consequence, we must recognize what that resembles. 10. Because I remind you, our ancestors did not fight to be free only for us to volunteer our silence generations later. They didn't die for this. They didn't die for this. Freedom of speech is not just a modern right. It is an inheritance to us. They died for this. For this illiterate to try and shut this down goes against everything they died for. So where do we stand? 10. Today is not just another political moment. It's a test. It is a test of whether we understand the value of our rights. They died for our rights. A test of whether fear will silence us. Fear will silence us. A test of whether we remember where we came from and how hard freedom was earned. They died for this. We speak not to destabilize the nation, but because silence is how nations lose themselves. So I want you to stay aware, stay informed, and never give away the rights your ancestors fought and died to give you. Like and subscribe to Trinidad Empowerment Network. Like and subscribe to Trinidad Empowerment Network. Much love. God bless. Take care. Peace.